Welcome to today's episode of Be Your Own Boss. I'm your host, David Gamble, and I'm thrilled to have you with us. Today, we have a very special guest, Stacey Tank, who brings a wealth of experience from her dynamic career journey across various industries. From her foundational years at General Electric to her transformative roles at Heineken and Home Depot, Stacey has navigated the corporate world with a unique blend of creativity and strategic insight. In this episode, we'll dive into Stacey's fascinating career path, her thoughts on leadership, and the evolving landscape of business and innovation. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur or a seasoned professional, there's something here for everyone. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. All right. Hi, Stacey. Welcome. Can we maybe just get started with your background, where you came from, and how, from a location perspective, and go from there?
Sure. No, great to be with you, David. Thank you so much for the hospitality.
Thank you.
I'm a whirling dervish in some ways. I've relocated many times and had many adventures, starting with 10 years at General Electric, which really formed the basis for my training as a professional person in the business world. And at that time, they had the industrial businesses, so aircraft engines, very close to your passions, healthcare, energy, banks, commercial real estate, all these types.
What didn't they do, right?
Right?
I mean,
And throw in Saturday Night Live and NBC Universal for some fun, which was a lot of fun. And I got to live in Brazil and Mexico, in Italy, in Germany, in the UK, in France, and work on Oxford Street in London, all these wonderful adventures. And then I went to Heineken and later boomeranged back to Heineken. So 2 stints at Heineken with a stint at Home Depot in the middle when I was most recently running their services businesses. So if you didn't want to renovate your own kitchen, we could do it for you type of thing. And then after that, moved to Amsterdam and was Chief Transformation Officer for Heineken in the Netherlands for the global business, 300 beautiful brands and 80 operating companies, 250 breweries, and then came back to the US and thought, I've been on this tanker ship for over 20 years, big publicly traded companies, right? 500,000 employees, or Home Depot's 150 billion or something like this in revenue. In the conference rooms of those companies, you always hear, well, if we were a growth phase company, we would, or if we were a startup, we would. And I had a unique opportunity based on a friend who is a serial entrepreneur who invited me to come step into the CEO role of her early stage company. And so I boarded a pirate ship and learned all about rolling up the sleeves and driving growth. And yeah, so that's a bit the nonsensical trajectory.
no problem. I mean, where did you grow up? I mean, from all of this, what was your upbringings? What kind of got you into this to begin with?
Well, I had no grand plan, but I was born in Syracuse, New York, and then I lived in Texas as a kid, and then Connecticut. And then I went to school at Syracuse University, and I was just there actually this week meeting with some students. And I used the Career Center there to help me get internships and get some guidance. And General Electric came to campus and they were interviewing, and I was lucky to get a spot on the interview slate. And then they hired me first for an internship, and then they offered me a full-time role. And that's where I stayed for 10 years.
Right. I mean, out of all that time with, like you said, the big cargo ships, what was, I guess, the best time and what was the worst times that you had during the experience? And it doesn't have to be any company, just like in general, what was your takeaways?
Sometimes it was the same experience that was both the best and the worst at the same time, because sometimes you're learning so much, you're so far outside of your comfort zone, and that comes with a profound discomfort and a bit of fear. So for example, I started in a leadership program out of university undergrad, which is typically how they would hire people into the company at that time. And then from what was more of a communications and marketing lens, I wanted to join the corporate audit staff, which was a hardcore accounting and finance job.
Gotcha.
Part of what intrigued me about that was I've always been kind of right brain, left brain balanced. So I wanted a little more edge, a little more science, a little more math, my grandfather was a mathematician for IBM, and I always had a part of me that loved that, but I have a big part of me that's also creative. And so this was also before the advent of, marketing and brand and communications becoming very quantitative, before big data was there, before
Right,
it was
right.
there. So it actually is more science now. But my dad had been an auditor in the beginning of his career, and he used to tell me audit stories for bedtime stories. Like, then we caught the doctors miscoding, and I thought, oh, miscoding. Okay, what does that mean? Anyway, it sounded thrilling. And so I was the only one from my background to ever be invited to join. And I did that for many years, living all over the world. And that was the most stressful, well, maybe not the most stressful, but it's up there in terms of stressful roles because I didn't know a lot about T accounting. I took a few accounting classes in college, but I needed to become proficient at generally accepted accounting principles, not the basic ones, but things like revenue recognition and deferred revenue. And so I was really out of my depth. And at the same time, what a thrill, to have even the chance to learn something like that. So the best of times and the worst of times.
Well, I mean, it's the best of times and worst of times, but you mentioned about the creative mind and then I call it the get it work done mind. Did you have, I mean, which one do you prefer? I mean, which one do you feel like is your passion? As an engineer, I have both of them, and then I've also seen that in startups as far as it's hard to get a person to do both the creative and the business side of it,
Yeah.
and then it's also hard to marry those two different people up, right? A creative and a business. It's
Yeah.
like a marriage, right? It's kind of like you're
Mm.
tied to each other because of that. So
Yeah.
what is your perspective on that from a personal and also your what you've learned over your career about that dynamic?
I don't know that this will be a very satisfying answer, but I think I've largely lived a life sitting in paradox and actually thriving in paradox. So I've done the creative role and I've done the, finance leader role, controllership. And because those experiences, those lived experiences have accumulated now, when I'm running a business or sitting on a board of directors, the question that I hold is what is needed from me right now? And I can either lean into more creativity, and that can be doing a deal, and you need to be solutions oriented and kind of, okay, let's think about this differently. How can we get both sides to really achieve what they want? But we're kind of at an impasse. And sometimes that means diving into the financials or something that's much more technical, a new tech stack implementation. We're living in this hyper technology oriented world. But because of the experiences I've had, I can lean in where the business can benefit the most and be super flexible and adaptable.
Does that mean you're kind of can be comfortable in both, or is it just you're so grit that you can do either or? Just depends on what the hat you want to wear.
I think I can do either or, but where I feel the most fulfilled is when I get to hold both. And that's the quest of my life actually, is to be able to do the art and the science, have enough art and have enough science in my life. And if my professional life is more science technical in the moment, then maybe my hobbies. I'm a musician, maybe I dial that up, and that's just how I get
Right,
fulfilled in my
right.
personal.
I mean, if you that's your personal. So how do you? I mean, you've worked with leaders, right? You've worked with big boss, CEOs and founders, and VPs of different. Is there any particular ones that kind of stand out that you feel like, oh man, he's a creative, or do you recognize that in other folks when you're leading, even people that are working for you?
Yeah, I've
Uh,
been reflecting on this recently. If I went back through my career and I had to write down the names of the people that if they called me, I would say I would work with them again 100% without thinking, that just immediate reaction, or I would hire them again 100%, no matter the role, without thinking about it. Who are those people? And then why do I feel that way about them? And I think it's when I think about the names on that list, They are people who have incredibly high integrity, which isn't, people say that, but it's not obvious. I've seen a lot of things, and people that really do what they say they're going to do. And when the water gets hot, they're still going to do the right thing. It's actually kind of rare because you have to have a lot of courage and you have to be willing to step into kind of a risky space, and you use your political capital sometimes to do the right thing for the good of the whole and sometimes to the detriment of you. I really admire those people, and I can think of some of those names right now. And then, folks who don't need to take up all the oxygen in the room, folks who genuinely want to help you get better, you to learn, that take the time to give you feedback because they want to see you putting new tools in your toolkit and maybe have a bit the heart of a teacher to bring
Right.
others along. But people that are competitive and want to win. I mean, I'm super competitive. I love to win. I love to do crazy things. So that's always a huge draw. And then sort of, there's a care for people that I think you can't manufacture. Is this someone who is going to be very transactional and it's all about the money? And look, we all want to deliver for our businesses, period. I want all my people to always
Right.
make their bonuses, period. I want all my shareholders to always be, more than happy with their shareholdings in my company. That 100% will never be a compromise. But I also don't think anything we do in life, parenting, I have 2 boys, it's not a transaction. I'm married. I've been with my husband for 26 years. That's not transactional, right? And being a business leader also.
Yeah, it's
I
not
think that,
transactional.
yeah, that human connection is everything to me.
I mean, I actually had a thought there as far as you talk about transaction, you talk about leadership, you talk about self growth. That's, is that, I don't know how much, I mean, we didn't get into your startups, but do you see a difference in how the big ships are dealing with it as the small ships? Because, I'm kind of getting into the VC world, the venture capitalist,
Yeah.
and how they take over companies that are trying to make it, especially in aviation, because they're expecting turnaround times of 3 to 6 years. And yeah, I've been in situations where they're manipulative to a certain extent to the CEO and whoever the founder is. Do you see that at the big companies, or is it
Yeah.
just a startup um, environment where that it crops into
Yeah.
the discussions?
I'm really fascinated by the models of capitalism that we've explored and what is the best way. Now that I've worked in multiple publicly traded companies, I sit on a public board. I sit on a family-owned 5 billion industrials annual sales manufacturing company board, and then I work with Blackstone for the last many years, sitting on boards for them and helping them with some of their companies, both on the private equity side and the private lending side. And then I've engaged with nonprofit boards. I founded a nonprofit, so I've worked in the nonprofit space as well. I've never worked in government, so that would be the one place I don't have as much information. And then I've worked in growth phase, startup.
Right,
So if
right,
I look at all those models, the first thing that I realize is that the stakeholders are different and the pressures from those stakeholders are different. In a publicly traded company, you're going to have shareholders. Are you retail held? Meaning, does your dentist own a piece? Is it Disney type of thing? Um,
right.
is it mostly institutionally held, where you have really big investors that are holding meaningful parts of your company? That makes a difference. Do you have hedge funds in your cap table, in your ownership structure? Well, they're looking for a super short term return. And there's where you get the activism. Um, when I started working with Blackstone and private equity, and they have been absolutely fantastic. I can't say enough good things about the people that I've worked with there, which I was just holding the question. You hear people talk about private equity, and I didn't know much about it. I had no idea what it was going to be like, but they're incredibly, incredibly high integrity, which is always really important to me. And there are no cheap tricks. I've never seen a cheap trick there. Never. These are really smart people who are trying to do the right things, including, when no one's looking. That has been my experience. And if I think about the pressures that they are under, that's a huge company. They have parts, they focus on certain sectors, and then they have their investment committees, and they also have a lot of pressures on them. And they raise a fund, or they have funds that they can deploy. They're meeting with thousands of companies. Okay, which founder, which idea? Then they put money into that business, and usually in private equity acquire a majority position, in venture a minority position. And then they are beholden to the folks from whom they got that money to help it grow. And that isn't on a forever timetable.
No,
So,
it's not. Well,
you raise the money, you think about where to deploy it, you deploy it. And then, yes, in that 3 to 5 year time window, you're hopefully going to add some value. And is that investing in innovation so that you have new IP? Is that bringing a collection of businesses together in a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario? Is that taking all the expertise that they have about running parts of the business super efficiently? Maybe they're using technology in a different way. Maybe you're able to tap into expertise that exists in other portfolio companies. I've been to some of these CEO board days that they hold at Blackstone, where they bring folks together doing similar work for them, and we all share and we all make connections so we can improve our capabilities and our organizational capabilities. There's really something to that. I mean, they are very good at certain things. So, at the end of the day, maybe the other thing I would mention is that private equity is about 40 years old. It's a
no,
pretty new thing. It's newer than having a company or having a publicly traded company, the stock exchanges, et
and
cetera.
then gaining capital that way through shareholders and basically leaning against your own company, right? Putting a lien to get credit.
Right.
Um,
And so I think we are seeing some shifts in what private equity and venture is, because there
right.
was low fruit. They came in, they did things. And now I would say the lowest of low fruits are gone. You have these mid-market kind of ghost funds that can't raise money, and they have some money deployed. They need to get it out of the market. The market is crazy. Now we're hearing interest rates are
Yes.
going to go up
Right.
and
Right.
down, which is not great. So I think it depends. And if you're going to engage in the venture space or the private equity space, you just have to do your homework to know who you're entering into a relationship with.
Yeah. I don't know how big that arena is. I mean, as far as equity firms, I mean, I've started to recognize about the angels list, right? The people who are basically individuals who are willing to put down whatever they feel comfortable with to a company. You mentioned the family office. I've dealt with some of those. I've dealt with, at least both of those. I've actually worked with a financial guy who was the CFO on a startup company I was with, and he went back because I think there was difference of opinion with the founder and the CFO, because there wasn't risk mitigation is very big for family offices, and it's kind of like they're not really taking the long haul. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of times it's like you said, it depends on short term and long term. Do they want to pull out? Do they want to, safeguard their funds?
Mm-hmm.
Because it is trying to accumulate that. But the venture capitalist, you're right. But if you're not in that circle, I mean, what is from a startup or from somebody who wants to start their own business, especially in something as huge as aviation, um,
Yeah.
because, and I've had a lot of discussions with founders. I mean, I just had one discussion this week about, he doesn't want to give up. He doesn't want to give up the ship. Basically, he feels like he's going to be on the clock, but yet there's so much that needs to happen for an aviation company to work. If you're, clean sheet design,
Mm-hmm.
some of the propulsion systems, especially with electrification and stuff like that, is
Mm-hmm.
is difficult on its own. You
Yeah.
look at Joby; they're in their 15th, 16th, 17th year. The only thing that they were getting revenue on is they just bought a helicopter. Blade was the name of the company that they
Mm-hmm.
bought. So with that, how do you even
Yeah.
start? I mean, if you're wanting to start your own business,
Yeah.
what is your recommendations to? I mean, even in this market, there has to be some gems
Yeah.
to be
Sure.
able to lean into.
I think the first question is, what is your risk tolerance? Because almost all startups fail. You have to be real about what you're moving into. And I get, what do the young people say? I get the ick. I have a reaction when people say, I'm going to start this and then I'm going to, be a billionaire in 3 years or whatever. No, no, please don't start a company with that ambition. It's mostly not going to happen. It happens for very, very few people. The fragility of these companies is so significantly, on one end of the spectrum versus a more established company. And it's there's so much outside of your control that can take your company down. I think in a low capex environment, which is not what you're talking about, and I'll reflect on that briefly, but if you're in a low capex environment where you can start small and iterate as you go. So, for example, Sarah Blakely, she's a founder in the consumer space. She's a female. She works in mostly female industries. She founded a company called Spanx, and she grew that from like this, and she's in Atlanta, Georgia, and she used her profits and just kept plowing them back into the business for I think 15 or more years, and bootstrapped the company, and therefore she owned the whole company and she had no debt. Now that is a fabulous thing, because when SOFR is going up and down and people can't service their debt, and is it easy? No, but wow. Now, in aviation, can you do that? Probably not, because you need money for your R&D. And so how would I approach it? Knowing, I worked at GE Aviation, but not at all being an engineer or a professional in that space. There are not a ton of companies in aviation, but there are some. And when I was working in big companies, we would have funds where we would go invest in entrepreneurs. And I think that can be super interesting if there's a Venn diagram between, what Boeing needs and then what this company is excited about. Maybe Boeing could be a seed investor, and then ultimately there's a lot of collaboration that can happen all the way down the road. Angels can be super interesting. I think you almost have to find a perfect fit between someone who has the money and the interest and they believe in you and
Yes.
all of
I,
that.
I consider it like date relationships. I mean, if you don't get the right vibes, it's kind of like you just walk away. It's
Yeah,
even if they're giving you money on the table and you just don't have a vibe with them. To me, it's like if you want to really figure it out and get married with somebody, just like getting married, it's a lifetime commitment. And if you're not compatible, the money doesn't matter. The money just is does too much of an enticement that results in bad relationships in
absolutely.
business.
And if you have investors in your company that where you all are not aligned, you're going to be spending 50% of your time trying to pacify issues that are happening there instead of growing your business and perfecting your technology. And then essentially you reduce the chances that you'll survive. These companies are so fragile.
Yeah, I mean, my I'll kind of give some outline of what I've seen in aviation history. A lot of times Boeing started out where they did everything. I mean, to the down to where they're actually being the operator of it, because there's a lot of spinoffs. If you go back in history, I think United was part of Boeing at one time, and then they
Mm.
spun it off. They had Pratt Whitney, I forget if it was Pratt or GE for the turbines, was a resultant that, hey, Boeing needed turbofans. So who did they go to, right? Or did they do it internally? That's some of the discussions I'm having with these guys who are doing aviation startups. Is like, I don't have the components available, and how do I find suppliers that are willing to put those products, because there's no market yet, right? They're and when you go talk to a Pratt, you go talk to Honeywell, you go talk to these guys, they're nice to you, but if they don't see a market and none of their products fit into your scheme, Yeah, if I was going back to a regular, vehicle, fixed wing, fuselage, or a helicopter with a big blade, great. Yeah, they have the products that I can put together. But if I'm trying to do something different, they're going to look at you. They'll entertain it, but they're not going to put any money down to it. They're going to be
Yeah,
looking money. They're going to be looking money for themselves
right.
to invest in that.
Yeah.
And it's like I think that's the double whammy that a lot of these aviation companies have is that they don't have the infrastructure from a supply chain
Hmm.
or development on the small components to be
Hmm.
able to make the overarching vehicle worthwhile.
Right. No, it's an interesting topic that you touch on, which is, what is needed, what is the customer, who's the customer, but what does the customer need and want, and are you a solution in search of a problem, or do you have a problem and you're going to be providing a solution?
Yeah,
One
yeah,
exciting thing right now, I think, in that space is, and it, you know taking politics completely out of it just for a moment, but there's a lot going on in defense innovation. I'm hearing a lot about new approaches and a lot of investment going into that space. So maybe that could be a place where folks could look to see what is their
right.
expertise, technology, and does it overlap?
Yeah, that's one spot. But I've also heard that they want to spend the money within 3 years from the government perspective. And a lot of that, the only way the industry is looking at it and going, I got to take stuff off the shelf. I can't spend any more money on R&D. I've got to spend money in manufacturing. They're
Maybe
trying.
Europe too, because Europe is doing a catch-up game with everything that's happened with Russia, Ukraine, and Middle East,
Yeah,
and but not my expertise at all. I just hear
yeah,
more deal flow happening there.
yeah. I do see a lot of pull. I do see a lot of I wouldn't say high end dollar products. I see more low end because of the Ukrainian war.
Hmm.
So there is a lot of push for that. I mean, just in the news, they lost. The U.S. just lost 11 Raptors, which is the one of the autonomous, kind of surveillance aircraft that they have.
Yeah.
Those are not easy. Those are not cheap. There's about, I think they're about 30 million or somewhat. So they lost about $300 million. So I think there's a lot of push to have more of those, but cheaper.
Right.
I think that's where the industry is pushing to more cheaper products, more cheaper delivery mechanisms,
Hmm.
not necessarily reusable because when they get cheap, then it's kind of like just make
Yeah.
some more.
Hmm.
And I wonder from that perspective, kind of maybe wrapping this up, but what is your kind of tea leaves reading from your perspective
Hmm.
from what you mentioned before about understanding all the different ways of raising capital. So
Hmm.
what is this? Is there a solution? And do you see something emerging as a way of kind of getting through the muck of what's going on now?
I think extraordinary ideas always win. And if your idea is 10, 50 times better than someone else's idea, it will still win. There will still be funding for those ideas. A remarkable moment to me was when I was a little girl in the 80s, and people asked, I have a fifth grader and then an older son in high school, but my fifth grader today had to dress up like what he wants to be when he grows up. So when I was a little girl in the 80s and we had that day at school, it was, I want to be Michael Jordan. I want to be a rock star.
Right.
I want to
Right.
be a police person. I want to be a firefighter. These were the discussions that we had. I recall that I wanted to be a rock star. Fast forward to my first son and that whole discussion when he was in elementary school. What do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I want to be Elon Musk. I want to be a founder. And it really took me by surprise because I was
Hmm.
like, how do you even know what a founder is? You're 8. And I think we romanticize this notion that and I was just at Syracuse University this week talking to a lot of young people who are going to graduate, they're studying entrepreneurship, they have an entrepreneurship degree, and they want to start a company from the jump at 21 years old, or they've already started them earlier. And by the way,
Right.
my hat off to you. And all those rules of gravity apply. Most startups fail. and they're incredibly fragile. And when I was a young person, I needed to go into an organization, could be like this big or this big, where I could learn from folks and they could give me real and honest feedback and I could improve myself. So in any case, I think we've romanticized founder, that whole thing too much. I think hopefully then there's a bit of a shakeout. And then the people who have the really great ideas, you have to demonstrate it. You have to be compelling. You're just shoe leather all the time, sharing your pitch, refining your pitch. But I see all the time, every day, deals are happening with folks who have truly extraordinary technology.
So the idea runs out. I mean, not to carry it on, but you touch on probably where almost we all fall on is education, right? What are we educating the next generation? Because like you said, I graduated high school in 80s as well. And then I wanted to be an engineer, right? Because I saw there's Air Force bases everywhere. This is during the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
Saw B-52s, not necessarily in the air, heard the engines. It was only 20 miles away from a Air Force base,
Yeah.
in Fort Worth. That's where originally I'm from.
Great.
Yeah, Carlsville.
Yeah.
So my dad, Bad was ex in the Seabees in the Navy during the war, and then he was a HVAC person for the on housing for the base. So you'd hear that, and that would be my ticket, right? That was what basically influenced my life. Not Ford. We drove Ford trucks and Ford cars. Not Henry Ford. And there was, I guess at the time there wasn't too many people that are like founders, right? There wasn't really that push. It was just going into work, doing 40 hours, coming back.
Yeah.
And, you talk about when you folks, that's all they idolize as founders. It's kind of like, okay, so what is that, right? What is that? How do you do that? And like you said, I always heard 20/80 rule, right? 20% of the companies fail within the first 1 to 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand that, I remember a lot of trades, right? There was a lot of trade schools.
Yeah.
Not everybody can be a founder. Not everybody can be an engineer. You just need to find your passion.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if that's a new dynamic that I think, you mentioned your kids. I have a 14-year-old, and, she wants to be in, kind of the mental business as far as psychologist or psychiatrist, nurse, or whatever, in that kind of mental capacity of helping folks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that, she's 14, and that means it's probably a little older than your youngest, but it just tells me do we need just to pull out everything we've done in the past? It just needs to be brought back again.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just rely on one direction of the culture to go, because that's what's basically driving us right now.
Mm-hmm. And the pendulums keep going like this. And so it'll keep, with corrections with AI, the AIification of the world, and all the debates we need to have about what we're comfortable with as a society, what we will allow, because we have to remember we are still in charge here. The people should stay in charge here. I've been throwing myself into this space to try to learn more, both tactically and then thinking about the knock-on consequences and really debating those within some of my board work and otherwise. We're in the kind of first pitch or the first inning on some of this stuff. So yeah, going to be an interesting next couple of decades.
It will be. AI is, to me, it's just another tool in my toolbox from an engineering perspective. I think people overblow it, and I don't see them doing all the warehouses, the data houses, what they're talking about. I do see some of them. I don't see the magnitude that they're thinking about. I just don't. I just don't for the short term.
Yeah.
And Elon's and his as orbiting data warehouses, I don't see that. That's just engineeringly and feasible, but impossible. Once you get it up there, and then you got to maintain it, you got to rely on it, and it's I don't want those things coming down on us.
Oh, right. Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
You know better than me.
there's a whole bunch that I could go to, but kind of with that. I mean, do you what? Oh no, I probably conclude with that. I know I was going to conclude, but education. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah.
For that, for college, right? Is everybody needed to go to college, right? You're offering up like possibly free college,
Yeah.
right?
When I work for Home Depot, we are number one. All customers are important. The most important strategically is the the professional, the HVAC professional, the electrician, the plumber, the contractor, etc. And we knew that the average age of a plumber at that time was 56 years old. Average age of an electrician in the United States is 58 years old. And we just kept thinking something is broken here. When I went to high school, we had shop class. I took shop class. I love shop
Yep.
class
Right.
because I grew up in a very DIY household and I always felt a bit, my skills were lacking and I didn't want to admit it. So I got to learn there, but we just could not figure out what on earth just happened. And we took a time out and paused. I was also, as part of my role, president of the Home Depot Foundation, which does a lot of work with veterans and veteran housing. And we did a systems change map back to the Second World War. And we discovered that, and my grandfather fought in the war and my grandmother was a Navy wave. So we went back to that time, and what we realized was when the first GI Bill was passed in the United States, it made college education accessible for the first time at scale. And my grandfather went to University of Wisconsin-Madison. He got a degree and an advanced degree in mathematics, and he went and worked for IBM. And that set a new standard for my family. So for my father, it was your just mental model. You're going to college. For me, it was you're going to college. Well, now we have HVAC professionals making $350,000 a year because there's such a huge shortage. So again, that pendulum, boom, boom, boom. And then in the 90s, our kids were testing below many world powers on math and science. So we saw the rise of STEM and STEAM in the schools. But there's only so much money in public education. So we defunded shop class and put it into STEM and STEAM. So the on-ramps into the trades were just shutting down. At the same time, we had this huge, prolific ramp up of private education, tuition that was double, triple, quadruple the rate of GDP in terms of annual year-over-year increases. And you mostly had people going to college because of this new mental model, taking loans, dropping out, having no degree, and having trillions of dollars in student loan debt. It is totally untenable that we continue this, and it's unethical. I mean, it's a horrible situation for many people. So I hope and I do see that we celebrate lots of paths, and not just because I'm saying the politically correct way, oh, that's nice, you go to trade school. No, really, we need to celebrate.
We need trades, right?
We need trades. These are awesome jobs. That's a great kind of path to entrepreneurship, by the way, that I think is less risky because there's so much demand right now. You could also work for a big employer. So indeed, I think there's going to be a shakeout in higher education. And you see it now also, there's a mass migration to the Southeast. So the universities in the North with international students on the decline, with a baby bust from the 2008 financial crisis, and then this migration to the South. Schools in the North are really struggling for students. And the idea of taking on the amount of debt that people have taken on. I know many adults in their 50s with student loan debt. I mean, this is not.
It's not sustainable. It's not sustainable.
No.
So I appreciate your time, Stacey. I always good to discuss topics that I'm kind of interested in, and just hearing your story on this, and just understanding from kind of the podcast being kind of being your own boss, but sometimes it does take a lot of effort, and it's not always for the faint of heart. So I appreciate your time. And then maybe I'll have you on again, because I think there's a lot of topics here that we can really dig into. So thank you very much.
I enjoyed it very much, David. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Be Your Own Boss. I hope you found our conversation with Stacey Tank as insightful and inspiring as I did. Her journey through various industries and her unique perspective on leadership and innovation offer valuable lessons for anyone looking to carve their own path in the business world. Remember, being your own boss is about embracing challenges, learning continuously, and staying true to your vision. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us bring more inspiring content to you. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue to explore the stories and strategies of those who are making their mark. Until then, keep striving, keep learning, and keep being your own boss. Thank you for listening.